Good evening, everyone. My name's Toby, and I have the privilege of reading the Bible tonight. Our reading tonight will come from 2 Timothy chapter 4, verses 6 to 22. So that's 6 till the end of the chapter. Two Timothy 4 from verse 6. For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time has come for my departure. I have fought the good fight. I have finished the race. I have kept the faith. Now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, which the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all who have longed for this appearing. Do your best to come to me quickly, for Demas, because he loved this world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, and Titus to Dalmatia. Only Luke is with me. Get Mark and bring him with you, because he is helpful to me in my ministry. I sent Tychicus to Ephesus. When you come, bring the cloak that I left with Carpus at Troas, and my scrolls, especially the parchments. Alexander the metalworker did me a great deal of harm. The Lord will repay him for what he has done. You too should be on your guard against him, because he is strongly opposed to our message. At my first offense, no one came to my support, but everyone deserted me. May it not be held against them. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength, so that through me the message might be fully proclaimed, and all the Gentiles might hear it. And I was delivered from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. To him be the glory forever and ever. Amen. Greet Priscilla and Aquila and the household of Onesiphorus. Erastus stayed in Corinth, and I left Trophimus sick in Miletus. Do your best to get here before winter. Eubulus greets you, and so do Pudens, Linus, Claudia, and all the brothers. The Lord be with your spirit. Grace be with you.
Hey everyone, it's a privilege to be able to talk tonight from 2 Timothy. As we start, we've got some people who are going to hand out some glow sticks. Try to resist cracking them straight away. But they're going to help us think about and remember maybe the things we're going to talk about tonight. But we're going to start with some general knowledge. I don't know if you're up on your general knowledge of famous last words from movies and some books of the Bible, but we'll give it a go, hey? So here we go. You can put the first thing up there, Zoe. I've got a question. If we go to the next slide, which movie does this phrase come from? So long, partner. What movie do you reckon? Okay, let's see. Are we right? Yes. Okay, how about this one? Roads. Where we're going, we don't need roads. Come on, surely you know that one. Yeah, Back to the Future. That's a classic. Okay, next one. It's a Bible book. Last words here, let everything that has breath bring... Yep. We know it. Psalms. Yep, good. That's right. This could be a trick one. Which one? You're right. Oh, yep, you're right. I'm Iron Man. How about this one? As You Wish. Front row has got it. Princess Bride, righto. Okay. Now another Bible one. Dear children, keep yourselves from idols. We had a lot of idolatry in Leviticus. What do you reckon? Give it a boil? Okay, next one for those Star Wars fanatics. What do you think? May the Force be with you. Which one? That one. I wouldn't have a clue. There's no place like home. Wizard of Oz, yeah, that's a pretty good one. Okay, actually, we've got a Harry Potter option here. Last one. The Scar had not painted Harry for 19 years. It was all well. Pained Harry. What do you reckon? James? No, what is it? I wouldn't have a clue. Pretty good. Famous last words. So obviously we're looking at Paul's famous last words. For me, in the last sort of 5-6 years, I've Actually had most of my musical heroes have passed away. People who I bought all their albums when I was young, tried to play all their music, and now it's an interesting experience having them not be with us anymore. And I was reminded of this yesterday. I spent some time with Martine's mum, my mother-in-law, and remembered for her, for probably the last 20 years, she experienced her peers passing on. Does anyone know the musician from America, Paul Simon? The singer-songwriter? He's 81. He's put out an album recently called 7 Psalms, in his words, about the great migration from life to death. And he has this haunting line. He says, "I have reasons for doubt. White light eases the pain. 2 billion heartbeats and out. Or does it begin again?" That's a haunting last question. 2 billion heartbeats and out. Or does it begin again? And I say that because one of the hearts that stopped beating in the last few weeks was a pastor, Timothy Keller, from New York City, who maybe for me was like a pastor to me from a distance. I really admired his ministry. It was free of scandal, and it was dominated by a love for God so much he would soak himself in the Bible, and a love for people that he would always deliver that as best he could with humility. And in his last address to his church, he encouraged his congregation to not be selfish. He said, "Don't seek after your own reputation." It's classic Tim Keller. And he quoted Jeremiah 45 and his own challenge to his secretary. He said, "And do you seek great things for yourself? Seek them not." It's sort of an echo of Paul's sentiment here in verse 17. He said, or verse 18, "To him, to God be the glory forever and ever." He wasn't writing this stuff for his own glory or reputation at all. He's after the renown and reputation of Jesus in the world. So it's good to notice that. Last night, I rang a friend. And if you have any sort of phone interaction with me, you've probably had this experience. I said, "Oh, did I miss a call from you 5-6 days ago?" He said, "Yeah, maybe, I don't know." He said, "Did I call you?" I said, "I think so. I'm just calling you back, Sorry about that." He said, "Thanks a lot, mate." He said, "I could have been in hospital." And he's like, "What's going on?" Anyway, had a bit of a chat. He said, "So what are you speaking tomorrow?" And I said, Yeah. He said, "What are you talking about?" I said, "Oh, the last words of Paul." And he said, "Oh, that's easy. Just run the flippin' race." That's his Aussie version of Paul. Run the flippin' race. That's a pretty good summary of what we're going to look at. Tonight we're going to look at what it looks like to run the race that Paul was living out, describing for us, helping us understand how essential it is, how hard it actually is. What it looks like chapter 1, verse 8, you have to choose between the gospel and deep social shame. 1:15, you'll have to actually expect people will let you down and sometimes leave. 2 verse 3, you'll have suffering of the level of wartime service, of professional distance running and first century farm labouring. 2 verse 9, it'll look like chains and being treated like a criminal at times. 2 verse 16, it'll look like every church you're a part of will be full of irrelevant babble that will spread like gangrene. 2 verse 24, there'll be controversy, opponents and quarrels. And this is normal, chapter 3 verse 1, until Jesus comes back. Expect that. In other words, we live in difficult times. There'll be some people who are false teachers who destroy their own lives and the lives of those you really care about. In fact, 3 verse 12, he says, all who desire to live a godly life will be persecuted. And 4 verse 3, like James encouraged us last week, if you try as best you can in even small ways to live Jesus' life for others, share about his message, there'll be times in our world where people around you only want to hear certain things. And in fact, if you do it faithfully, sometimes they'll want to blank you out altogether. And actually, your teaching may be more likely at certain times to empty rather than fill churches. And even you may give in, you may buckle under pressure and give in to turn to false teaching yourself. So all those things are just as likely. So what you have here, when you think about what running this race might look like, is beautiful realism. That's what Paul gives you in his writings, a beautiful realism. It's a beautiful, realistic picture of a life that's worthy of the gospel. Now, the very last sentence helps you, if you haven't been with us, helps you get an idea of the nature of what you're holding. It's a letter to a particular person and to everyone who's a follower of Christ at the same time. The last phrase says, the Lord be with your spirit, grace be with you all. In Greek, it's more obvious. The word you is singular and plural. Helps you understand the first phrase, the Lord be with your spirit. That's reference to Timothy in particular. There's a whole lot of personal things that relate to Timothy. Yet at the same time, he says, grace be with you all. So the invitation is for every follower of Christ to actually apply these truths to their life. The question is, will we serve Jesus with our lives? Now, to help you understand the essence of what I want to get across today, have you got your little glow sticks? I want you to do this. Don't crack them yet. Hold on. It's like delayed gratification, isn't it? So can you all say after me? Break, shake, illuminate. Let's say it again. Ready? Break, shake, illuminate. Okay, let's do it. Let's break them. Break, crack them. Break. Then we're going to shake it up. You get the colour starting to come out. And then hold it up. Illuminate. Okay, those are our three things. Break, shake, illuminate. We should turn the lights off later. But this is the thing. We're going to realise Paul gives us a summary here of what it looks like to give your life to Jesus. And it will mean breaking from the values of our world and living to a beat of a different drum, a different set of values. It also means shaking up all your relationships. If it means anything, it'll affect pretty much people are the air we all breathe. You'll be shaking up your relationships and you'll be illuminating the beauty of Jesus to the world. So remember our things. Ready? Say it again. Break, shake, illuminate. Okay, they're the 3 points tonight. So the first one, verse 6, 7 and 8, Paul looks at his present, his past and his future to see some ways in which he's broken, he breaks from the values of our world to the values of humility and service. Have a look at verse 6, talking about his present. For I am already being poured out like a drink offering, and the time for my departure is near. So he's got this image of being poured out and departure. Now, Paul's death sentence is hanging over his head. He knows his time is limited. And this is an image of sacrifice from the Old Testament. Like imagine a lamb on an altar and wine will be poured out at the base of the altar. Now, he's probably referring to the type of execution he's going to have. Because as a Roman citizen, he won't be crucified. He would most probably be beheaded. And it's a very gruesome image that to be beheaded, then his blood would pour out on the ground. But that's the image. And you could actually say that's how Paul lived, giving his life, pouring it out like a drink offering to other people. And the word departure, that's a word that's used to describe in Greek things like sailing imagery, setting sail for a trip. I'm setting a prisoner free or packing up my tent and breaking from camp. So what he's saying is, I'm about to set sail from this life. I'm about to pack up the frail tent of my body, and he says to move to my heavenly home. Now, the way he speaks about this is a break from the values of our world. Because he's not griping, he's not complaining. He has a beautiful realism. So when you read Paul, you hear heartache, honesty, grief, warmth, and joy and celebration. You see all these things, but he doesn't gripe and complain. That's so interesting. It's a beautiful realism to how he describes it. He's saying, look, this is costly, but it's worth it. Now, that pastor, Timothy Keller, his son tweeted something he said just before he passed on. And he said to the family, he can't wait to see Jesus face to face. And the son quoted this, there is no downside for me leaving, not in the slightest. That's a break. To be able to face death like that is a break from the values of our world, and that is living by the values of the gospel. There's a character, the 19th century German philosopher, his name Arthur Schopenhauer. He was well known for his bleak outlook on life. He was an atheist, and one of his works was called Studies in Pessimism. and this guy, I reckon, he had such a bleak... He said, look, if we were all rational, we wouldn't have any kids. He said things like this, today is bad, and day by day it will get worse, until at last the worst of all arrives. So that's sort of his another line. He said, human life must be some kind of mistake. There's a photo, actually, Zoe, if you've got it there on the next PowerPoint. This is Arthur, I think. Yep. Every day's a bad hair day for this guy. He's not a happy camper, obviously. But he lived a pessimistic, arrogant life from all accounts. He slept with a pistol by his bed. One night there was a significant incident where a lady kept him awake. In frustration, he came out and pushed her down a flight of stairs. She filed a lawsuit against him and he had to pay compensation for the rest of her life. So he's this sort of miserable life. But he had a great insight about human experience. As a philosopher, he said, life presents itself as a series of challenges. Think about it from birth. First challenge, breathe, cry, eventually walk and talk, feed yourself, contribute to the world around you, all those challenges. But there's such a difference, isn't there, between Paul's perspective and Arthur's. This is a break. The type of life Paul's showing us is a break from the values of our world. And the second thing, he talks about his past. Verse 7. Verse 7, he says some very famous lines here. I've fought the good fight. I've finished the race. I've kept the faith. You might have heard of that. And those words, each of those words give off the idea that at some point in his past, he began to fight. At some point in his past, he began to run. At some point in his past, he began to take responsibility for the faith that was entrusted to him. So I fought the good fight. What type of fight is he saying is a good fight? Look, some of you just like to fight, right? At the drop of a hat. Some of you, in fact, drop the hat, He says, let's fight the good fight of faith, is what he called it. And in chapter 3, verse 15, he says, the object of that is faith in Christ Jesus. He says, which is able to make you wise for salvation. In other words, if you want to fight, he says, fight for the gospel. That's worth a fight. Let's fight for that. And in other words, let's fight for the hope that comes from God's graciousness, which is different from the hope that our world offers. The hope of our world is much like Coldplay, what Chris Martin's going to give you. I know he's cute, but he says, I will fix you. You know the song? Chris can't fix you. Sorry. As good as he is, good as a songwriter, that's the hope of our world. We need help outside of the human race. We need people who aren't broken to come and bring life to us. That's the hope of the gospel. The astonishing thing, in the next few weeks, we're going to think about how crazy it is to believe what we actually believe. That there was one man who we describe as God in the flesh, came and walked among us, lived a sinless and perfect life. Not one of his motives was not pure. Everything he did was love for God and love for people, motivated by those things. Just that statement's an impossibility to us as humans, of what we know of human nature. And it starts on the premise of a virgin birth and a resurrection from the dead. It goes against physics. You believe this stuff. But this is where we find life, that God showed up, suffered in our place, and offers us life that we need from outside ourselves. Though hope comes from the gospel. He talks about finishing the race on the basis of that. And he talks about it much like a marathon. He talks about keeping the faith. And in verse 8, he talks about his future. He's expecting a reward. Verse 8 says, now there is in store for me the crown of righteousness, with the Lord, the righteous judge, will award to me on that day, and not only to me, but also to all those who long for his appearing. He's expecting, in his words there, a victor's crown for his service to God. It's his athletic imagery coming back again. And what it really is that at last he will receive this gift of life where he experiences the fullness of the Bible word righteousness that he already had positionally because he knew Jesus. Now he's completely free from sin. Not just the power of it, but free from its presence. And that's one thing Paul was looking forward to there. So this is breaking, isn't it, from the values of our world? It's definitely breaking from suburban southwest Sydney, the values of comfort, of control, of power, success. As good as life can be here, this is about a life driven by the value of humility and service. It's going to be costly. It's a different beat of a different drum. And it's a different perspective, isn't it? An eternal rather than a perspective of now. I think the perspective of our society is more, you could call it nowism. And we had a really helpful illustration from Lachlan last night at youth group. We've been talking about the teachings of Jesus that usually get ignored. And we looked at last night, he taught a lot about greed. And for all time for human beings, it's a little bit like the frog in the kettle problem, you know. We don't realise we're greedy. It sort of happens like that. And he talked about the fact that all the stuff you and I have, it just doesn't go into eternity. What goes into eternity is people. He talked about, so why don't we think about making eternal investments in people? Because they're the only thing that's going to last. And he had this great illustration of monopoly money. He said, if I went down the shops and waved $1,000 of monopoly money at the shop, they'll think you're crazy, you're out of touch with reality. Right? It's irrelevant, isn't it? Means nothing. But when you're playing the monopoly game, it's fantastic. You can buy out Mayfair, rent out stuff, get all the money, all that stuff, win the game. But as soon as you close the box, it's irrelevant. And he said, listen, when God, so to speak, closes the box on our life, all the money is irrelevant. The only thing that transfers into eternity are people. You have an eternal future in God's good universe. So he's saying, let's think about everything from an eternal perspective rather than be consumed with the now. That, guys, is a break from the values of our world. That's living by the beat of a different drum. Okay, can we say our three things again? Ready? Break, shake, illuminate. So we're going to talk about the shake. If you break from the values of our world, it's going to shake up your relationships. If you give your life to Jesus, it will shake them up in so many profound ways. And probably from the next verse, from verse 9, you have the air we breathe as human beings. And as followers of Christ, I want to say very clearly, leadership begins with loving people. I read a pamphlet of a well-known training like group seminar for church planners, for church leaders, and all talks about giving you great strategies and processes to have really effective ministry. But what was intriguing when I read it, there was not one mention of loving people. But you can't help but notice the emphasis in Paul's letters on loving people as being central to following Jesus. And so this is why when you break from the values of our world, it's going to shake up your relationships. You know, we often overestimate the significance of our strategies and our plans and underestimate the power of a changed life where you love people. And so Paul here is loving, he's serving, he's walking with people. I don't know if you realise this. Scholars have, if you like, a dispute over the authorship of this letter. Despite all the sort of obvious statements and references to Paul as the one writing and things that would give away him, you don't realise that sort of argument's going on in academia. But I think one of the most compelling reasons why it's Paul and not someone else trying to imitate Paul is this last section for verse 9. If you were trying to copy Paul's writing, if you were trying to shadow him, you'd go for a book like his epic work, the book of Romans. You wouldn't do all this people stuff. There's over 18 people mentioned here. Timothy, Demas, Crescens, Titus, Luke, Mark, Tychicus, Carpus, Alexander, Priscilla, Aquila, Onesiphorus, Erastus, Trophimus, Eubulus, Pudens, Linus, Claudia, and all the brothers and sisters. Remember, it's all about loving people. The first statement in verse 9, do your best to come to me quickly. That's specifically to Timothy. Do your best to come to me quickly. There's something very significant about the significance of real friends. And the longer you live in life, the more you'll work out that list is short for each of us. To have a real friend who will be in the foxhole with you, who will take the knocks with you, who will even step up and fight for you, that list is small for each of us. But see how important it is, the first thing he's talking about here. How important that is in a life following Jesus. And basically, Paul gives us three categories of people in his life. Those who bless him, those who disappoint him, and those who oppose him. The first one is profound. You can't miss his warmth, but You don't miss his humanity. He's always recognizing his weakness and his need for help, his need for other people. And that's emphasized later in his ministry. He has more people working along him later from when he starts. If Paul couldn't pull that off by himself, what makes you and I think we could? Isn't this beautiful invitation? Isn't it like when he says, Timothy, we try to be here soon. We say, do your best to come to me quickly. Isn't that a beautiful human request? I need you. I need your help. So let's have a look at the reality of the way following Christ will shake up your relationships. So verse 10, he says, for Demas, and he says here, because he loved this world, has deserted me and has gone to Thessalonica. Crescens has gone to Galatia, and Titus to Dalmatia. Luke alone is with me. Most people have legged it somewhere else. They've gone. They've left him. We don't know the motives of all the characters here, but we know something about Demas, that he's in love with this present world, as opposed to verse 8, loving for the appearing of Jesus, of their Lord. And that helps us understand the challenges all of us experience in life with people are about what people love. All of them. All of your challenges are about what you love, and people challenges are about what they love. We heard this in chapter 3, verse 1 to 4. That this is a present challenge for people in the church, not out of the church. He says in our time that we live right now, the challenge is we will be wanting to love ourselves rather than love God. That's his summary in chapter 3, 1 to 4. And that causes all the rifts, all the conflicts, all the broken relationships. And it's an incredible logical flow. In chapter 3, verse 1, he says, people in the last days will love themselves. And therefore, he says, love money. It makes perfect sense. If I love myself, I want to exalt myself with things. And then my words, and eventually becomes quite brutal. Here's something I want you to notice, though. In the end of many of his letters, these names that you're seeing here show up. So Colossians chapter 4, you see Luke, Mark, Tychicus, and Demas as well. This is what he said at the end of Colossians. Luke, our beloved physician, greets you, as does Demas, the guy who's deserted here. See, these aren't casual acquaintances to Paul. These are people he invested in, did life with. They suffered together. They experienced persecution. Some of them were beaten and flogged together. They saw great joy in terms of serving and loving people and praying for them and seeing people give their life to Jesus and find hope in God. All that wrapped up together. But even people like Demas and Luke desert. He said, Demas has deserted me. Luke alone is with me. So when Paul says this, he's not saying we always knew about Demas. We always knew every time, we couldn't trust this guy every time we went out to help people. He's not saying that. See, this is painful precisely because he trusted him entirely. So however well you train people or think you know people, it's only those who love for the appearing of Jesus who will actually stay the course. See, when Demas had to make a choice, he chose now over then. He chose being consumed by nowism rather than an eternal perspective. That's why he's deserted. Now, when you look from verses 11 to 13, you have a number of requests being made. Paul says things like, get Mark, get my cloak, get my books. And when you hear all that, you might start thinking, Paul's getting on in 8 years. He's getting a bit older. Maybe this is, and we're in winter, we sort of can think about this a bit. Is this him getting a bit old and he feels the weather more? He needs a friend to hold his hand, and time goes by slow. He needs something to read. Is that really what he's saying? And my bet is if you were talking to Paul today, you'd probably suggest that, wouldn't you? Let's get you a gas heater. Let's get you like a nice jacket, a good quilt. Let's get you some company during the day. And look, the days are long. Let's get you some books to read. God's shutting all the doors on your life, mate. It's okay. You can just have a rest. That's what we would probably say. Verse 11, Paul says, get Mark. This is like Blues Brothers. We've got to get the band back together. Because it's about the gospel of immortality rather than death that's at stake. We have to get a team back together. Get me Mark. He's amazing. He can make a massive impact on people. Get my cloak. This is most likely his travel cloak. And because, as has happened before, the emperor could change his mind. So he's ready to go. And get my documents. These are his stock and trade. He wants to write letters like this letter to Timothy to encourage other followers of Christ. These aren't novels. That sort of writing hadn't been developed for centuries to come. Like hundreds and hundreds of years before the idea of novelistic fiction and all that stuff was developed. Not now. Paul isn't stopping. I've got something for you to consider here. How do you interpret your life and how things go? After what you're seeing in what Paul's saying about following Christ. If you think hard times are a signal that you should stop, or if you think hard times are a signal that everything is wrong, or if you think hard times are a signal that God is saying stop, you'll spend most of your life stopping. When is Paul going to stop? Paul is going to stop when they remove his head. That's when Paul stops. There's no stopping for the Christian life. He's going to evangelize to the executioner as he takes him out. He's going to try and witness to the guy who holds a sword. And the night before, he's going to be planning his next opportunity to live a life modeling Jesus' love and servanthood. He's only going to stop when they remove his head. See, this should be the most depressing passage. Everything Paul has worked hard at is just falling apart. His opportunities, by 60 AD, the churches Paul had started are all getting blown up and the oppression and persecution of Christians is just being widespread. People are getting killed left, right and centre. This should be very depressing. But we have no right to read the Apostle Paul that way. Because, can you put your hand up if you're Jewish? None of us. All of us are the fruit of his ministry. And this is how it's happened in every generation, despite all the persecution of Christians in history, and even Demas deserting, the next generation rallies. What was Paul's way of guarding the gospel? How does he say you should guard the gospel? This is about shaking up relationships. What's his method? How do you protect the gospel? You give it away. How do you guard the gospel? You stand strong in the hope that comes from God's love for you and you pass it on. Chapter 2, verse 2, you pass it on to people. It's like watching the waves at the beach, that as they sort of like constantly collapse, yet roll forward up the beach. That's what's happening all through history. So it's a bit like free-flowing rugby union. You have a big sweaty guy has the ball and he's tackled and shoved into the mud, but before he goes down, he passes it back to the next big sweaty guy who moves forward. And they do it again and again, and that's how the gospel moves forward. Keep giving away. All these people here are Paul's 2 verse 2, the people he's passing it on to. And it's interesting to think about the shaking up of your relationships. If you want to, it's a really interesting thing to read Acts chapter 13 and chapter 15 and look at the story of Mark. This guy, he says to get Mark. Because back in Acts chapter 15, there was a dispute between Paul and Barnabas that split up the dream team over Mark. Mark let down the team. And Paul said, he's unreliable. He's not going on my teams anymore. Barnabas disagreed. And now, look what's happened here. It's amazing. Get Mark. Pretty awesome. Isn't it marvellous how God works to make us, as it says in the text, useful for ministry in his good time? So as a follower of Christ, you don't have to be defined by your worst moments. You don't have to be defined by your failures. It's a beautiful picture of what God does in our life. So I guess I want to ask you, what's it look like when Jesus stands by your side? What are you expecting to happen when Jesus stands by your side in life? That's really the promise. The most important promise for me of the gospel is that God says, I will never leave you. If you give your life to Jesus, he gives his life to you. That's it. You've got him for eternity. What's it look like when you have Jesus standing by your side? You know, verse 17, Paul has summarized all the things he's confronted with. Verse 17, but the Lord stood at my side. What's that look like? Does that mean prison doors start opening? Medical scans come back clear? Money ends up turning up in the bank? Families and marriages are all fixed? What's it look like? We can be very clear. It doesn't mean prison doors are open, does it? This text can't tell us that. Listen to what verse 17 said. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength. This is huge. So that through me, the message might be fully proclaimed and all the nations might hear it. He talks about here being delivered from the lion's mouth. We don't know if that's practically he was delivered from being fed to lions, or if Nero, the emperor, was the lion's mouth. We understand in history the way Romans dealt with Christians is they plea bargained with them. They offered them an option. You know, you can get out of this. It's okay if you're into Jesus, but as long as you make a sacrifice to our emperor God. This could be Paul saying, listen to his confidence. And I was delivered from the lion's mouth. It could have been he was delivered from giving in to the plea bargain. But whatever it is, we know the destination of the rescue. The next verse, 18, the Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. That's his hope. In the end, God is going to bring me through to my heavenly home. So clearly it doesn't look like everything sorts out. But what it looks like is God's plan all along. That he's going to speak through you. Can we do our three things? Break, shake, and illuminate. That's the third thing. When you break from the values of our world, and because you've given your life to Jesus, and you shake up, everything gets shaken up. God's like a loving adjutant. You end up bringing healing to relationships. You bring kindness more often to relationships. Everything doesn't change straight away. He changes your soul. So you want to live a different way, but you only ever develop character in the choices you make through the relationships in your life. And so we change slowly. But so much so that the message might be fully proclaimed through us. You illuminate. That's God's MO. It's amazing. Paul says we're treasures in jars of clay. We're all broken. We're all fragmented, weak people. But isn't it amazing that God puts his light in your heart so that when people see in your heart, they see God in that moment? Illuminate. You show the beauty of what Jesus is like, the beauty of his love to the world. God's graciousness, undeserved favour. That becomes the message of your life. That's what happens when God stands by your side. It's an amazing picture of what God's created us for. And when you stop and think about the significance of where he's put us, all the relationships, all the friendships, the neighbourhood, our workplace, it was God's intention that you rub shoulders with the people you rub shoulders with so that they may seek God and perhaps find him. Illuminate. What a beautiful, beautiful way to reflect on this whole book. So I hope every time you got a party and you got these little babies and you make your little bangles later if you want, there's whatever. Just remember, following Jesus is going to break from the way of this world. It's going to shake up everything, especially relationships. And that's where you get to illuminate the beauty of Christ to everyone. Well, I hope you're encouraged and challenged. We're going to pray together and sing together. Father God, thank you so much for the way you speak about what we need to hear. We ask that you would give us eyes to see, and you, even as we sing, as we have supper together, as we talk together about the reality of what it means to live a life based on the values of your world, of your kingdom, of humility and servanthood. Help us reflect on what that must mean for us in the relationships where you call us to bring health and hope in, forgiveness and healing, guidance and truth. And we ask, God, that our lives would actually illuminate the beauty of Christ to the world. That his perfect love might be something that becomes a message through even our weak, broken lives. But we thank you for the great privilege of getting to be a part of what you're doing in the world. Pray all that for Jesus' sake. Amen.